Hi there everyone, Lars here with a special anime recommendation brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And the anime that I want to recommend to you right now, and it's a little bit sad that I'm recommending it right in the middle of its season, but it's absolutely worth it. You should go and you should binge all the episodes you can, is Heavenly Delusion. This anime story right here, in tone, in feel, in story, is like everything that people pine after from the late 80s and early 90s when it comes to anime, but now in current day form with even better animation, and I would argue even more competent writing than some of the stuff that we absolutely love back from the retro days. Heavenly Delusion tells a very interesting, very twisted story about people trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, trying to reconnect with the people of the past who initiated the apocalypse. There's a whole lot more going on right there, but that's basically the overall setting and arc, as you have two characters in particular, Maru and Kiriko, who are on this adventure to find a place simply called Heaven. In order to find Heaven, they've got to traverse the entire length and breadth of abandoned post-apocalyptic Japan, filled with all kinds of monsters, rogues, renegades, crazy new governments, and weird communes, and all different kinds of things set up all over the place. It is a really engaging post-apocalyptic adventure, one that actually I feel works really, really well. Yes, it's got the whole fantasy sci-fi bit of special monsters going around eating people that don't exist in real life, but this is mixed in with a very brutal, very realistic look at what a more anarchist world would look like. When most of humanity's been wiped out and most of technology is gone, what are people going to do? Yes, you have the roving gangs of weirdos. Yes, you've got the cannibals. Yes, you've got the warlords, all that good stuff that we know from The Walking Dead. But you also have very solid communities that have come together to make life work, and that's just what humans do. Humans overcome all obstacles to make life work. So you've got your own farming communities, you have small little convents just out there in the countryside, you have people who have houses that are actually open to everyone, but hey, if you're going to come into my house, I've got guns, I've got drugs, I've got swords, and I'm going to mess you up if you mess with my stuff. I'm opening this up to out of the goodness of my heart. You have traps, you've got gangs, you've got animals roaming around, causing all different kinds of issues. You have people re-engaging in sports. All of this stuff just makes sense. So in a very fantasy setting, everything feels oddly realistic, and this is then complemented by a very soft animation style for the characters against a very harshly animated background, which makes you sympathize for these characters even more and gives you that same sort of made in abyss kind of pain when something bad happens to them. Now, besides the adventures of the two teens, Maru and Kiriko, traveling through Japan, we also get all of these cutaways to a different place, this strange facility where we get to see all of these kids who are the product of various experiments running around, growing up, and coming into adolescence right here. And there are adults, there are scientists who are watching all of this, but not really fully engaging. They have their robots to engage with these kids, and as such, these kids are kind of left to their own devices, and this creates this weird other anarchist society where the kids are really kind of all doing their own thing, experimenting with each other, and doing stuff that they don't really realize if there's any sort of, they have no understanding really of morality or what is good, what is bad, except for what they themselves can discover through their own experiments. In a way, this is kind of like a bizarre Garden of Eden situation where you have these perfectly innocent kids growing up and discovering more about themselves, discovering that some of them have special powers, discovering their own intellect, and discovering for them what is right and wrong. And this leads to events that will kick off all kinds of incredible stuff. I am not going to give away any major spoilers for this story because it's one that I really, really honestly do believe that you have to experience for yourself. I know that some people have probably already spoiled some of the big twists in the very first few episodes, but they're ones that if you haven't watched the show, if you haven't been spoiled yet, no, do not get spoiled. Experience it for yourself because it is a wild ride. As I said earlier, this is a story that feels like it came out of the retro days because it has all of that dark philosophy to it. It's not afraid to go to those kinds of places. It's not afraid to be controversial. And oh boy, people here in the West are going to feel very ticked off about a variety of things that they see. People on the political spectrum from right to left are going to be like, what is this story doing? And that's okay. It's okay to go to the crazy controversial areas because that's kind of what's happening here with this story. In a Garden of Eden environment where kids are learning and discovering on their own, things are going to happen. And in a post-apocalyptic setting, who's to say that stuff cannot happen? And all the different kinds of weirdness in between. Now, I know that some people will say, well, Lars, it's not as dark or bloody as some stories. Like, there's some people who are saying, this is like Akira, and then there's like, no, it's not Akira, because Akira did this. To which I say, absolutely. Do not compare Heavenly Delusion to Akira. Akira is obviously doing its own thing. It's its own story. And one of the things that Heavenly Delusion has going for it is that it has a much longer runtime as a series. And so, what Heavenly Delusion does is, because it definitely goes to some places, and it hits hard. But what it does is it takes its time to build up those hard-hitting scenarios. It doesn't just simply stick in the knife right away and twist. It befriends you, it gets to know you, it invites you on in for dinner, and then stabs you in the back and twists as you then get the horrifying reveal about what's really going on with a particular situation. And honestly, that works out really, really well because we get far more immersed into this world, into its characters, especially into its main characters, and why we should care about them. Because if you just look at the basics of it, that Kiriko has been hired to help Maru get to this place called Heaven, and they're just going on these various adventures, and it's kind of a monster of the week type scenario. People are going to say, well, you know what? If I want something like that, I'll watch The Mandalorian. Well, because The Mandalorian has kind of sunk in the ratings in its past season, this is definitely one to check out. And as I said, it goes places. It goes dark. It has some really neat philosophy. It has some really neat commentary on the human condition, what people are willing to do and what people are not willing to do. What does society look like when everything falls apart? What do people make of it and make of themselves? And it's actually way more hopeful than we might think, but at the same time, because it's far more hopeful than what we initially jump to, that's what makes the horror even worse, because you're like, wow, in a world that's actually better than what I expected, these kinds of monsters, both literal monsters and human monsters, can be absolutely horrifying, because we have these examples of, if the world is falling apart, what good can these people actually do? Kiriko and Maru do a lot of good as they're adventuring through desolate, abandoned Japan, helping out all these different people along the way, and yet there are always these new monsters that rise on up to confront them, and it's like, why? We don't need this kind of a world. And oh boy, there are some monsters, let me tell you. If you've started watching the anime, you haven't even gotten to some of the worst stuff that then pops up later on in the manga. Whoo boy. So yeah, that's as much as I can say right now, because as I said, I don't want to spoil for anyone that I'm right now recommending this to. I don't want to spoil what kind of adventures you're going to go on with this particular series. Depending on what kind of traffic this particular video gets and how the anime does overall, I might actually jump into doing a couple of analyses and reviews for this show later on down the road, because it is something that I've been enjoying so much. It's such a well done story. The animation is gorgeous. The acting is superb. The writing, the philosophy, the way that the two major plots are balanced with each other is fantastic, because even if you know what twist is coming up, it's really, really interesting to see how these different storylines intersect in really bizarre ways to help emphasize the greater philosophies that the story is playing with. So, with all of that being said, I highly recommend Heavenly Delusion to y'all. I will say this though, it is not a story for kids. Like I said, this is like one of the darker stories out of the great retro days of anime, so you've got violence, you've got gore, you've got sex, you've got all of that stuff going on, so don't show this to little kids. This is definitely for a much more mature audience, but it's one of those mature audience stories that I think will be very much appreciated and very much beloved by those who do spend the time with it. So that is my recommendation right there. Again, depending on what kind of traffic this video gets, I might do more videos on Heavenly Delusion in the future because I've really been enjoying it. But until then, if you're looking for more anime recommendations, if you haven't yet seen Vermilion and Gold, I would highly recommend it. I've got a bunch of videos for that here on our channel. And if you're a writer looking for some writing advice, please check out our podcast, Camille's Harem. And if you would like to support us, please like, comment, share, subscribe, but especially check out the books that we've written and published. Links for all of that and more are in the description below. And until the next video y'all, thank you for joining us on this post-apocalyptic adventure that we call writing, and tschüss.